The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "You're a burden, Mom." My son, Jason, said it so casually while scrolling through his phone, not even looking up at me. I stood in his kitchen doorway, holding the casserole I'd made him, my hands trembling. This was the same boy I'd raised alone after his father left. The same child I'd worked 3 jobs for, skipped meals for, sacrificed everything for. I'd spent 28 years pouring my heart into him, believing that someday he'd appreciate all I'd done. I'd imagined growing old with his love and support, the way families should be. But instead, here I was being told I was nothing more than a problem he needed to solve. The casserole dish slipped from my hands and shattered on his expensive marble floor. Neither of us moved to clean it up. Little did I know, those cruel words would change everything forever. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Jason finally looked up from his phone, annoyed at the mess. "Great, now look what you've done," he muttered, shaking his head. I stared at the broken glass and the food scattered across his perfect floor. It felt like a symbol of everything broken between us. "I worked all day making that for you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He rolled his eyes and stood up. "I didn't ask you to. You just show up here all the time, expecting me to be grateful. I have my own life now, Mom. I don't need you hovering around me constantly." His words cut deeper than the shards of glass at my feet. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the toddler who used to run to me for comfort. Now he looked at me like I was a stranger bothering him on the street. I wanted to scream, but instead, I felt a cold calm wash over me. What was I supposed to do now? Jason kept talking, his voice growing colder with each word. "You need to understand that I'm not responsible for taking care of you. I have my career, my girlfriend, my friends. I can't have you calling me every day and showing up whenever you want. It's suffocating." Each sentence felt like another nail in my coffin. I looked around his beautiful house, the one I'd helped him make a down payment on when he was just starting out. I'd given him $20,000 for my savings, money I'd been putting away for years. "This house," I said quietly, "I helped you buy this house." He shrugged. "That was your choice. I never asked you to do that." The betrayal hit me harder than anything else could have. This was the same home where we'd celebrated his promotions, where I'd helped him paint the walls and plant flowers in the garden. Yet now, it was a place where I was no longer wanted. As I stood there, staring at him, I realized something even more painful. I had been blind to the truth. But what now? For a moment, my old self wanted to apologize. I wanted to get on my knees and beg him to love me again. Maybe if I promised to call less, visit less, need less. Maybe if I made myself smaller, he'd remember that I was his mother. The woman who'd sat up all night when he was sick, who'd cheered at every baseball game, who'd celebrated every achievement like it was a miracle. But then I looked at his face, cold and impatient, and I remembered his words. "You're a burden." He'd been thinking this for a while. This wasn't a moment of anger or stress. This was his truth. He genuinely saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience in his perfect life. Why should I beg for love from someone who had already made it clear that I was just taking up space? I couldn't bring myself to crawl back into his life, begging for scraps of affection like some desperate stranger. No, I wasn't going to degrade myself like that. But if I didn't beg, what would I do? What choice did I have left? I bent down and started picking up the pieces of broken glass, my mind racing. Jason watched me clean up the mess, making no move to help. "Just leave it," he said impatiently. "The cleaning lady comes tomorrow." Of course she did. He had money for a cleaning lady, but couldn't spare a kind word for his mother. I continued picking up the pieces, each shard cutting into the truth I'd been avoiding. My son was selfish. Not just young or thoughtless, truly selfish. I'd raised him to be grateful, respectful, caring. But somewhere along the way, I'd failed. Or maybe I'd succeeded too well at teaching him that his needs came first. As I dropped the last piece into my hand, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't going to be his victim anymore. I wasn't just some helpless, aging woman he could dismiss. I was stronger than that. I was going to take control of my life, and he was going to see that I was far from being a burden. But the question lingered. What could I do that would truly shake him to his core? I stood up and looked at Jason, really looked at him. He was scrolling through his phone again, already dismissing me from his attention. I need to go, I said quietly. He nodded without looking up. Good. And Mom, maybe next time call before coming over. I might not be home. Next time. As if there would be a next time after this. I walked to the door, stepping over the remaining crumbs of casserole on his floor. My car keys felt heavy in my hand as I made my way outside. The evening air was cool, but I felt numb to everything around me. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house I'd helped him buy. Every brick, every window held memories of better times. But those times were gone. I couldn't stay trapped in the past, hoping he'd become the son I dreamed he would be. It was time to make a decision that would change everything. But as I drove home to my small apartment, a strange thought gnawed at me. What would he think when he found out what I was planning to do? The family house had been sitting empty since I'd moved into my apartment last year. I'd kept it as an investment, thinking maybe Jason would want it someday. It was the house where I'd raised him, where every room held memories of his childhood. His first steps in the living room, birthday parties in the kitchen, homework sessions at the dining table. The house was worth $400,000 now, much more than I'd paid for it 20 years ago. I'd been planning to leave it to him in my will. But why should I give him anything when he clearly didn't value what I'd already given? That night, I called a real estate agent. I want to sell my house, I said. How quickly can we do it? She sounded surprised. Well, in this market, probably within a month if we price it right. I smiled for the first time in days. Perfect. With the money from selling the house, I could buy something bigger, something better. Something that would show Jason exactly who he'd dismissed as a burden. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but wonder, what would he think when he found out what I had done? The real estate agent, Claire, came over the next morning. She walked through the house, taking notes and photos. This is a beautiful home, she said. Are you sure you want to sell? The market is good, but this place has such character. I looked around at the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd refinished, the garden I'd planted. I'm sure, I told her. It's time for something new. She nodded and started preparing the listing. Within a week, we had 3 offers. I accepted the highest one, $450,000. More than enough for what I had planned. While the sale went through, I spent my time house hunting. Not for another small place like my apartment. I wanted something grand, something impressive, something that would show the world and my son that I wasn't some pitiful old woman to be dismissed. I found it in the hills outside town, a mansion with 6 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a view of the entire valley. The asking price was $400,000. Perfect. As I signed the papers to make an offer, I felt a strange mix of excitement and sadness. But as I stood in the grand foyer during the inspection, I couldn't help but wonder, was this truly enough? Would this be the final blow? Moving day came faster than I expected. The mansion was everything I dreamed of: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a staircase that curved like something from a movie. I hired professional movers and decorators to make it perfect. For the first time in years, I was spending money on myself without guilt. No more worrying about saving every penny for Jason's future. He'd made it clear he didn't want or need anything from me. As I walked through my new home, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. Every room was mine to decorate however I wanted. No one could tell me I was taking up too much space here. But in the back of my mind, I could already hear Jason's voice, demanding answers, probably feeling shocked and confused when he found out what I'd done. I wasn't planning to tell him about the mansion. He would have to discover it on his own. But I knew he would. Small towns talk and news travels fast. It was time for him to learn that his mother wasn't the helpless woman he thought she was. But how would he react when I finally gave him the confrontation he so richly deserved? I waited 3 weeks before making contact. I knew Jason would have heard rumors by now. The real estate sale was public record, and people in town were already talking about the woman who'd bought the big house on Hillcrest Drive. I called him on a Thursday evening. Jason, I'd like you to come over for dinner this weekend. There was a pause. Come over where? Your apartment. I smiled into the phone. No, my house. I'll text you the address. Another pause. What house? Mom, what's going on? But I'd already hung up. I spent Saturday preparing for his visit. I cooked his favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings, and set the dining room table with my finest china. When the doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, I took a deep breath and opened the door. Jason stood on my doorstep, his mouth hanging open as he took in the massive front entrance, the stone columns, the perfectly manicured lawn. What is this? He demanded, his voice a mixture of shock and anger. This is my home, I said calmly. Please come in. But as he stood there, struggling to find words, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Jason followed me through the marble foyer, his head turning in every direction. I watched his reflection in the mirror as we passed. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. How did you afford this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I led him into the living room with its 20-foot ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. I sold the family house, I said simply. He stopped walking. You what? The anger was starting to build in his voice now. You sold our house without telling me? I turned to face him, keeping my expression calm. It was my house, Jason. I bought it, I paid for it, I maintained it for 20 years. And I decided to sell it. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when he was a stressed teenager. But that house was supposed to be mine someday. You always said it would be my inheritance. I smiled sadly. That was before you told me I was a burden. The words hung in the air between us, and I could see the exact moment when he realized what had happened. His face turned red, his mouth opened and closed like he had no idea how to respond. But as he stood there, struggling to find words, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. You can't be serious, Jason finally managed to say. You bought this place just to spite me? I shook my head. I bought this place because I deserve to live somewhere beautiful. I spent 30 years putting everyone else's needs before my own. That ends now. He looked around the room again, taking in the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the luxury he'd never associated with his mother. This is crazy, Mom. You've lost your mind. I had expected this reaction. Have I? Or have I finally found my sanity? I gestured toward the dining room. I made your favorite dinner. Would you like to eat? Or would you prefer to keep insulting me? He followed me to the dining table, but I could see his mind working, trying to process what was happening. As we ate in silence, I watched him struggle with this new reality. His mother wasn't the meek, sacrificing woman he thought he knew. She was someone who could make bold decisions, someone who had resources he'd never imagined. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, more uncertain. How long have you been planning this? I set down my fork and looked him in the eyes. Since the moment you called me a burden. But I wasn't done. The final act was yet to come, and he had no idea what was waiting for him. After dinner, Jason tried a different approach. Mom, I think we need to talk about this rationally. Maybe you should return this house and buy something more reasonable. This is way too much space for one person. I almost laughed. Too much space? Like I was taking up too much space in your life? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. That's not what I meant, and you know it. But it was exactly what he'd meant, and we both knew it. Jason, I said calmly, I want you to understand something. I worked for 40 years. I saved money. I invested wisely. I lived below my means so I could provide for you. But I was also providing for myself, for my future. This house represents 30 years of careful planning. He shook his head. But why didn't you tell me you had this kind of money? The question revealed everything. He wasn't upset that I'd spent the money. He was upset that he hadn't known about it, hadn't been able to access it. Because money changes how people treat you, I said. I wanted to know that you loved me for who I was, not what I could give you. His face flushed again. That's not fair. But fairness had nothing to do with it anymore. It was time for the final confrontation, and I could see in his eyes that he was starting to understand how serious this was. I think you should sell this place and come stay with me for a while, Jason said suddenly. We can work through this together. The offer was so absurd that I actually did laugh this time. Stay with you? In the house where you told me I was a burden? Where you made it clear I wasn't welcome? He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was having a bad day. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. But he had meant it exactly the way it sounded. Jason, do you remember when you were 8 and you broke Mrs. Peterson's window with your baseball? What did I teach you? He looked confused by the change of subject. You said I had to take responsibility for what I'd done. I nodded. I said actions have consequences, and you couldn't just say sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. You had to work to earn the money to replace that window. Understanding started to dawn in his eyes. This is about consequences, I continued. You made a choice when you called me a burden. You made a choice when you told me you didn't want me in your life. Now I'm making my choices. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the words I'd been waiting to hear. What do you want from me? But my answer wasn't what he expected. I don't want anything from you anymore, I told him simply. That's the point. Jason stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. What do you mean, you don't want anything? I stood up from the table and walked to the window, overlooking the valley. The lights of the town twinkled below us like fallen stars. For 28 years, I wanted your love, your respect, your gratitude. I wanted to feel like the sacrifices I made matter to you. But you've made it clear that what I want doesn't matter to you. He followed me to the window. Mom, that's not true. I do love you. I turned to look at him. Do you? Or do you love the idea of having a mother who will always be there to help you when you need it? The question hung in the air like smoke. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? When was the last time you asked about my life, my dreams, my feelings? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew he couldn't remember. I'm 62 years old, Jason. I've spent 40 years taking care of other people. Now I'm going to take care of myself. But even as I said the words, I wondered if this newfound independence would ever truly fill the hole his rejection had left in my heart. Jason left that night without saying goodbye. I heard his car start up in the driveway, then the sound fading as he drove down the hill. For the first time since moving into the mansion, I felt truly alone. The house suddenly seemed enormous, every room echoing with emptiness. I walked through the halls, my footsteps loud on the marble floors. This was what I'd wanted: independence, freedom, a space that was entirely my own. So why did it feel so hollow? I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the back patio, looking out at the garden I'd hired landscapers to design. It was beautiful, perfect even, but there was no one to share it with. No one to point out the blooming roses or comment on how the fountain looked in the moonlight. I'd won the battle, but I wasn't sure what the victory was worth. My phone sat silent on the table beside me. No text from Jason, no calls, no angry voicemails. Just silence. Maybe this was how it would be from now on. Me in my beautiful house, him in his, and an ocean of hurt between us that neither of us knew how to cross. But would this loneliness haunt me forever, or would I eventually come to find peace in my solitude? 3 months passed without any contact from Jason. I fill my days with activities I'd never had time for before. I took art classes at the community center, joined a book club at the library, started volunteering at the animal shelter. For the first time in decades, my schedule was my own. I could wake up when I wanted, eat what I wanted, go where I wanted without considering anyone else's needs or opinions. It should have been liberating. And in many ways, it was. But there were moments, usually late at night or early in the morning, when the silence became too much. I'd find myself reaching for the phone to call Jason, wanting to share some small detail of my day, before remembering that he'd made it clear he didn't want to hear about my life. I'd decorated one of the guest rooms as a space for him to visit, choosing colors I thought he'd like, adding touches that reminded me of his childhood room. But the room stayed empty, the bed unslept in, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have been the bigger person, should have forgiven him and tried to repair our relationship. But then I'd remember the look in his eyes when he called me a burden, and my resolve would strengthen. One evening, as I sat reading in my library, the doorbell rang. It was 9 o'clock, too late for deliveries or unexpected visitors. When I opened the door, there he stood, my son. Jason looked different. Thinner, tired, with circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 28 years. He held a small bouquet of flowers in one hand and shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" For a moment, I just looked at him. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to make him feel the rejection I'd felt. But a bigger part of me, the mother part that would always love him no matter what, stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the flowers forgotten on the coffee table between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About what you said, about what I said, about us." I waited, not making it easy for him. I talked to Dr. Richards about it. Dr. Richards had been his pediatrician, a family friend who'd known us both for years. He helped me understand some things about myself that I didn't want to see. Jason's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, I was selfish. I was cruel. And I was wrong." The apology I'd been waiting months to hear, but now that it was coming, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Was this real change, or just words he thought I wanted to hear? What was he really here for? Was this an apology, or just another act of manipulation? "I know you probably don't believe me," Jason continued. "I know I've hurt you in ways that might not be fixable, but I want to try." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I wrote you a letter. Everything I should have said months ago." I took the envelope, but didn't open it. "Jason, words are easy. Actions are what matter." He nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here to ask what I can do to show you that I mean it." The question surprised me. I'd expected him to make demands, to try to negotiate his way back into my good graces. Instead, he was asking what he could do for me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know if there's anything you can do. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal because someone says sorry." His shoulders sagged. "I know, but I have to try. I can't live with knowing that I threw away the most important relationship in my life because I was too selfish to appreciate what I had." I looked at this man who was my son, but also a stranger. "Why now? What changed?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My girlfriend left me last month. She said I was selfish and demanding, that I expected everyone to revolve around my needs. She said I treated people like they existed just to serve me." The words hit home, because they were true. But would this really be the end, or was he going to try something else? "I realized she was right," Jason continued. "And I realized I'd learned that behavior somewhere. I'd learned it from how I treated you." He looked around the mansion, taking in the luxury surrounding us. "You deserve all of this, Mom. You deserve to be comfortable and happy and proud of what you've accomplished. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." I felt my defenses starting to crack. This wasn't the angry, demanding young man who'd called me a burden. This was someone who seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely changed. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said. "I don't even expect you to forgive me at all. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the son you deserved all along." I opened the letter he'd given me and read it through tears. 3 pages of apologies, memories, and promises. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. More honest than he'd been with me in years. "What do you want from me, Jason?" I asked, echoing his earlier question. "Nothing," he said simply. "I just want the chance to show you who I can be." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. Was this the beginning of healing, or just another betrayal waiting to happen? Over the following weeks, Jason started small. He called every few days, not to ask for anything but just to check on me. He sent flowers for no reason. When I mentioned that the garden fountain wasn't working properly, he came over the next day with tools to fix it. He didn't ask to stay for dinner. He didn't hint about needing money or favors. He just fixed the fountain and left. Slowly, very slowly, I began to see glimpses of the son I'd always hoped he could be. He remembered my birthday and came over with a cake he'd made himself. It was lopsided, and the frosting was uneven, but he'd made it with his own hands. "I wanted to do something for you for once, instead of buying something," he said. We ate birthday cake in my kitchen and talked about everything except the past few months. It felt almost normal, but I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal his real motive. Old habits die hard, and I'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily. "Mom," he said as he was leaving that night, "I know I have a lot to make up for. I know it's going to take time. But I want you to know that I'm committed to this, to us, to being better." I watched him drive away and realized something had changed inside me too. The anger was still there, but it was softer now, less sharp. Maybe healing was possible after all. But something deep inside told me the past wasn't finished with me just yet. 6 months after that first awkward conversation in my living room, Jason called with news that surprised me. "Mom, I got promoted at work. They made me regional manager." I felt a surge of pride, followed immediately by suspicion. "That's wonderful, honey. Congratulations." There was a pause. "I wanted to take you out to dinner to celebrate. Not to celebrate my promotion, to celebrate you. None of this would have happened if you hadn't forced me to take a hard look at myself." The dinner was at a nice restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd always wanted to try but never felt I deserved. Jason was different, attentive, asking about my art classes, listening when I talked about my volunteer work. He didn't check his phone once during the entire meal. "I've been thinking about something," he said over dessert. "I want to pay you back for the down payment you gave me on the house. With interest." I nearly choked on my tiramisu. "Jason, that was a gift." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "You gave me that money when you barely had enough for yourself. You sacrificed your security for my future, and I threw it back in your face. I need to make this right." His voice was steady, determined. This wasn't the impulsive gesture of someone trying to buy forgiveness. This was the carefully considered decision of someone who understood the weight of his actions. Was this the moment of change? Or just another manipulation? True to his word, Jason started making monthly payments into my account. Not huge amounts, he wasn't wealthy, but consistent payments that showed he was serious about making amends. He also started including me in his life in ways he never had before. He invited me to his company Christmas party, where he introduced me to his colleagues with genuine pride. "This is my mother," he'd say. "She raised me by herself and did an incredible job, even though I didn't appreciate it at the time." I met his new girlfriend, Rebecca, a teacher who seemed kind and grounded. She made a point of asking about my interests, my hobbies, my life beyond just being Jason's mother. "He talks about you all the time," she told me during one visit. "About how strong you are, how much he admires you." It was strange hearing myself described that way, as someone to be admired rather than tolerated. Jason started spending holidays with me, not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to. We cooked together, watched old movies, talked about books and current events. It was the relationship I'd always dreamed we could have. But I remained cautious. Change is hard, and people often revert to old patterns when life gets stressful. I protected my heart while still allowing myself to enjoy these moments. Could he really change? Or was this all just an act? The real test came a year later when Jason lost his job. The company downsized, and despite his recent promotion, he was let go. The old Jason would have called me immediately, expecting me to fix the problem, to offer money and solutions and endless emotional support. Instead, I heard about it from Rebecca, who called to let me know he was struggling but didn't want to burden me with his problems. "Burden me?" I repeated, struck by the choice of words. That weekend, I drove to his house. He answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking embarrassed. "Mom, Rebecca wasn't supposed to call you." "She was right to call me," I said firmly. "We're family. Family helps each other during difficult times." I saw tears in his eyes. "But I don't want you to think I'm only calling when I need something. I don't want to go back to being that person." I hugged my son, this man who had hurt me so deeply, but who was genuinely trying to change. You're not asking me for anything, I pointed out. That's exactly the difference. I helped him with his resume, used my contacts to get him interviews, offered advice when he asked for it. But I didn't try to fix everything for him, and he didn't expect me to. When he finally found a new job 3 months later, he called me with the news, his voice bright with excitement and relief. I did it, Mom. I actually did it on my own. And I knew he had. Was this the beginning of healing, or just another betrayal waiting to happen? Now, 2 years later, I sit in my mansion's garden watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. Jason and Rebecca are getting married next month, and I'm helping plan the wedding. Not because they expect me to, but because they asked me to, because they value my opinion and want me to be part of their celebration. The guest room I decorated for him is finally being used. He stays overnight sometimes when we're working on wedding plans or just when he wants to spend time with me. He's learned to appreciate the beauty of this house, the symbol of my independence and strength. I'm proud of you, Mom, he told me last week as we sat on the patio, for standing up for yourself, for not letting me walk all over you, for building this amazing life. The angry, bitter part of me wanted to say, you should have been proud of me all along. But I've learned to let go of that anger. It served its purpose. It gave me the strength to change my life, but holding on to it now would only poison the good things we've built together. I'm not the same woman who stood in Jason's kitchen clutching a casserole dish. I'm not the same woman who begged for scraps of affection from her ungrateful son. I'm someone who knows her worth, who commands respect, who has created a life of beauty and meaning. And Jason is not the same selfish young man who called me a burden. He's someone who has learned to value the people he loves, to show gratitude for what he's been given, to be a partner rather than a taker in relationships. Would my son ever truly understand? He already did. And that understanding had transformed us both.